Today we're going to talk about line plots. And remember, line plots are things that show data or information on a number line with an X to show how many times the number comes up. So you might remember studying line plots that looked like this, where they have categories like red, blue, purple, or green. You might have also seen line plots that have whole number categories listed along the bottom. And this year, we're going to talk a lot about line plots that have fractional values along the bottom. But either way, whether it's a fraction, a whole number, or a word category, line plots are another way to view and graph information. So let's look a little bit more closely at the parts of a line plot. The first thing is that all the data is graphed with an X, and each X represents one. They show how many of each. And when I say they represent one, that could mean different things for different graphs. This particular graph is talking about teaspoons of medicine being given. So each X here might be a person who's getting a certain amount of medicine. You could have each X representing people. You could have each X representing the number of TVs in a household. It depends on the graph that you are looking at. Another thing that's important to remember is that all line plots have labels that tell you what's being counted. The labels on a line plot come up along the bottom, right along the line. And there's two main things to remember about these labels. First, they're equally spaced apart. So you'll notice the distance between every single label on my line plot is about the same space. That keeps them evenly spaced apart. The second thing you might have noticed is that all of the labels go from least to greatest. So when you're creating or reading a line plot, your smallest values will be all the way on the left, and your largest values will be all the way on the right. And you can answer lots of different types of questions using line plots. But first, let's take a look at how to build your own line plot. You can do this in just 4 steps. So, the first thing you need to do is you need to draw a line. So I'll put a line along the bottom of my page. Next, you need to label the line with your categories listed from least to greatest whenever you can. Now remember that very first line plot, it had words for the different colors like blue, green, purple, red. In a line plot like that, you won't be able to go from least to greatest. But for most of the line plots we'll be looking at, you'll be given some kind of number value. So if I'm looking at my chart here, I want to find the smallest number and the biggest number. I find my smallest number is 1 and my biggest number is 5. That means my labels or my categories are going to go from 1 to 5. So I'm going to list with equal spacing 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as my categories. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to plot the X's to represent each value. And this is where it's important to find a strategy that helps you stay organized. For me, I like to look number by number. So I'm going to look through all of my information for all of the number ones. I can see 2 ones, Ben and Sally. So I'm going to put 2 X's above the category for 1. Now, if I was doing this on paper, I would cross those off so I remember not to count them again on accident. But here I'm just going to take away that little highlight. Now I'm going to look at how many people ate 2 pieces of pizza. I see 4 people, David, Kai, Blake, and Paul. So I'm going to list 4 X's in the category for 2. Next, I'm going to look at the category for 3 slices. Again, I see 4 people, Jimmy, Annie, Jake, and Vienne. So I'm going to list 4 X's to represent those 4 friends. Then I need to look at the number of people who ate 4 slices. Now I see 3 people, Clara, Val, and Neil, so I'm going to list 3 X's for each of those swimmers. And last, I need to look at the category with 5 slices. There's only one person who ate 5 slices, and that was Sean, so I'll put 1 X in the category for 5 slices. Now all of my data is plotted. I can go to my last step, which is to title my line plot. I can look at the information from my data to help me come up with a title. Since this particular graph is all about pieces of pizza being eaten, I'm going to title it Number of Pizza Slices Eaten. Now let's look at one more thing for today, which is how line plots show information. And before we look at some specific questions about this line plot, I want to point out two important things. First, line plots don't always have to count by ones. They can count by twos or fives or even fractional amounts like 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, or more. You'll notice this line plot skip counts by twos. The categories are 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. They still follow the rules of having equal spacing and going from least to greatest, but it's not always jumping by ones, so I wanted to point that out. The second thing that's unique about this category is that not every category is going to have an X every time. If you look, the value 8 doesn't have any X's in that section. That tells me that no one scored 8 goals. It's okay to leave a category blank, but it's important to remember I couldn't just jump from 6 to 10. I needed to use that space for 8 in order to keep the equal spacing. So now let's take a look at a couple types of questions that you might see. So the background up here says a soccer coach made a line plot to display the number of goals each of his players had made this season. So that background tells me that these X's are talking about people, and I can tell from the title that we're talking about the number of goals they scored in the season. So the first question says, how many players were on the soccer team? Well, I know that each X represents a person, so to figure that out, I need to count the number of X's to find the number of players on the team. If I count all the X's in each of the categories listed, I get 11 total players. Let's take a look at another question we might see. Number 2 asks, how many players scored less than 2 goals? Well, that wording is important. I know that less than 2 goals means that they either scored 0 goals or 1 goal, but it doesn't include exactly 2. So I'm not going to count any of the X's in this category because those people all did score 2 goals, and I only want to know what's less than that. So if I'm looking at less than 2 goals, I have 1 X in the category for 0, so that tells me that only 1 player scored fewer than 2 goals. Last, what was the highest number of points scored by 1 player? If I'm looking at my line plot, I know that the highest number of points means I need to find the biggest category for each individual person. So I'm going to look to the right-hand side of my line plot, and I can see that this particular player scored 10 goals. So that means the highest number of points scored by 1 player was 10. Hopefully that helps refresh your memory on some of the basics of line plots. Use this video and the attached pages to help you as you're doing your practice for today. Thanks for tuning in, guys.